He's a street-smart lawyer who plays both sides of the law. They call him the Lincoln Lawyer. Mick is one of LA's most notorious defense attorneys, a master at getting guilty people off the hook. His philosophy is simple. If he wins, that just proves the justice system has flaws. If he loses, well, then the guy probably deserved jail anyway. His brand of dirty justice drives the cops and prosecutors crazy. And no one's more frustrated than his ex-wife, Sobel, who just so happens to be a prosecutor herself. She once spent months trying to nail a violent criminal, only for Mick to swoop in and get the guy acquitted in court. That was the last straw. She divorced him and took their kid, but Mick, totally unfazed, still doing things his own way, with a line of clients out the door. Just look at his recent work. He got a troubled teen girl out of a drug charge by using her tip on a local dealer as leverage with the DA, turning jail time into rehab. Then, there was the biker gang guy caught growing weed. Mick flipped the script and blamed the DA for flying their chopper too low, claiming airspace violation. Charges dropped. Even his driver's an ex-client, now working off his legal fees behind the wheel. After years of defending the underdogs, and never without his trusty Lincoln, folks started calling him what he truly is, the Lincoln Lawyer. One day, Mick gets a case that's anything but routine. A young, wealthy playboy from Beverly Hills, Louis Roulette, is accused of assault with a deadly weapon, and oddly enough, he personally requests Mick as his defense attorney. The guy casually offers $1 million bail, like it's pocket change. Mick lays down the terms without blinking. I need $100,000 up front, working on $5.50 an hour, another $100 if we go to trial, more if we go past a week. Appeals, we start over. Louis lost his father young, and now runs a real estate empire with his mother, Mary. He's got a spotless record, other than a few parking tickets, and he's active in philanthropy. Seems like the perfect client. The judge approves his bail without much fuss. But there's one catch. The prosecutor on this case is a guy named Ted, known in legal circles as the Trickster. He's infamous for pulling stunts to win cases, all in the name of career climbing. Mick couldn't care less. He's convinced he can beat him. Time to tell me what happened. According to the police report, a woman named Maggie called 911 in the middle of the night, claiming Louis broke into her home, assaulted her, and held a knife to her throat. She says she only managed to escape after smashing a bottle over his head and getting help from a neighbor. When the cops showed up, they found Louis unconscious on the floor, blood on his hands, a knife nearby, and Maggie badly injured. They arrested him on the spot, but Louis swears he's being set up. He says the moment he walked into Maggie's place, someone knocked him out cold. He never touched her. In fact, it was Maggie who left him a note at the bar earlier that night, inviting him over. I'm innocent. Another classic game of he said, she said, a Rashomon situation. But for Mick, the courtroom is a chessboard. He's not here to prove what really happened. He's here to prove what can't be proven. Because in the world of law, it's not about whether Louis did it. It's about whether the evidence says he did. And right now, the evidence isn't looking great. He was found at the scene. Maggie was clearly injured. His hands were covered in her blood. The weapon was right there on the floor. But don't forget, turning a rock-solid case into dust? That's Mick's specialty. Just then, an old friend of Mick's enters the scene. Frank. Frank used to work in the LAPD and has connections all over town. Through a mole in the DA's office, he manages to get a copy of Louis's arrest report, and more importantly, security footage from the bar on the night of the incident. On the footage, it's crystal clear. Maggie was the one who slipped Louis a note, and she wasn't exactly acting like a victim. She was cozying up to another guy at the bar too. Mick zooms in on the guy's watch. It's on his right wrist, which means he's a lefty. And Maggie? Her injuries are all on the right side of her face. Suddenly, the pieces start falling into place. What if this whole thing was a setup? Maggie and the lefty saw a rich playboy and decided to cash in. Lure Louis back home, knock him out, rough Maggie up, smear some blood, plant the knife, frame him for assault, and then sue for a massive payout. Mick knows this might not be the full truth, but it's plausible. It makes sense. And in a courtroom, believable is all that matters. Plus, once the jury finds out Maggie's a prostitute, this version of the story might just work in their favor. Feeling confident, Mick takes the bar footage straight to Ted, hoping to strike a deal, drop the charges in exchange for the surveillance evidence. But Ted doesn't bite, not even close. Mick frowns. What am I missing here? Turns out, quite a lot, because in the packet of evidence Ted just handed over, there's another copy of the arrest report, and this one is not the same as Frank's version. On this one, it clearly says the knife's handle was engraved with the initials LR. Mick's heart sinks. Louis showed up at a prostitute's house carrying a knife with his own initials on it. Why didn't he mention that? That's when Louis finally opens up, after Mick reminds him their conversation is protected under attorney-client privilege. Louis explains that years ago, his mother Mary was raped while showing a house. Ever since then, he's carried that knife for self-defense. And as for Maggie being a prostitute, he left that part out when first telling the story, because his family lawyer was in the room. He didn't want his mother to know he was with a hooker. He just couldn't bear to disappoint her. But now the case is falling apart fast. The knife, the initials, the lie of omission, and worst of all, Mick can't shake the feeling. What else isn't Louis telling him? And what surprise is Ted still hiding up his sleeve? Mick knew Ted worked in the same office as his ex-wife Sobel, and those two couldn't stand each other. So he found an excuse to invite Sobel out for drinks. A little charm, a little alcohol, and soon enough, Sobel let something slip. Apparently, Ted was working with a snitch. Not just any snitch, but a jailhouse informant. One of those guys who trades dirt on his cellmates to get a lighter sentence. This one's name? Jesus. A career rat, famous for flipping on other inmates to save his own skin. And guess what? The night Louis was arrested, he was placed in the exact same holding cell as Jesus. Mick immediately has his assistant start digging into Jesus' background. Then he goes back to review Louis's arrest report one more time. When he gets to the section describing Maggie's injuries, something stops him cold. Prostitute, dark hair, injured on the right side of her face. It triggers a memory, a brutal case from years ago that made national headlines. The victim was also a prostitute. Her body was covered in over 50 stab wounds from a knife. No fingerprints, no murder weapon. Just one clue, a towel covered in semen. The DNA led police to a man named Val. Val admitted to sleeping with the victim, but swore he didn't kill her. Mick was his defense attorney. But the DNA evidence was damning. There was no way to explain it away. Worse, a witness testified that they saw Val tossing a knife into the river that night. Mick begged Val to take a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. But Val had broken down in tears, screaming, "I didn't kill her! You have no idea what this'll do to my mom. Mick, please, you have to believe me." In the end, Val got 15 years. And all these years later, Mick can still hear his cries echoing in his mind. Now, staring at the current case, the similarities are chilling. Same type of victim, same method of attack, same weapon. And a terrifying thought hits Mick like a freight train. What if Val was innocent all along? Mick remembered one key detail Val had shared back then. That night, the victim invited him to her place from the bar, and there was a white guy hanging around them both. Plus, the murder weapon was never found. But the weapon analysis report said the knife was strikingly similar to the one Louis carried. The more Mick thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. He grabbed Louis's photo and rushed to the prison to see Val. Years had taken a toll. Val looked worn and beaten down, but among the photos Mick showed him, Val immediately pointed. "That white guy I saw at the bar the night of the crime. That's him." Back home, Mick confessed to Frank, "I told Val to plead guilty. I even pushed his sister to beg for mercy because the odds were stacked against us. I did everything I could to get him the best deal. But you know what? Back then, I actually thought I did a damn good job." The truth hit Mick like a sucker punch. He recalled something his lawyer dad once said. The scariest clients aren't guilty or innocent. They're the ones who are truly innocent but can't prove it. Because when you fail to defend an innocent client and they go to prison wrongfully, that's a lawyer's deepest shame. Mick grit his teeth, swearing he wouldn't give up. But Frank calmly warned him, don't forget attorney-client privilege. Lawyers can't just spill their clients' secrets to anyone. Otherwise, they lose their license. Even if you have proof your client's guilty, that evidence can't be used in court. Worse, you can't drop a client unless they want out. Basically, Mick was trapped. That bastard hired me for this reason, to box me into a corner. It was a full-blown setup, but Mick wasn't one to back down. Then, Louis showed up in person. He said, as soon as he heard Mick went to see Val, he knew Mick was onto the truth, but still warned Mick to bring his A-game and win the case, and to keep his nose out of other business. Before leaving, Louis even mentioned Mick's daughter, but the first to get hurt? Not Mick's daughter. It was his friend Frank. A few days later, Frank was shot dead at home. The murder weapon? Mick's own antique gun, the same one Louis had secretly taken when he broke into Mick's house. Before he died, Frank left a voice message, saying he'd found proof of Louis's crimes. But before he could say more, someone knocked on the door. Then silence. Frank's death sent Mick spiraling into a dark abyss. Not only had he wrongfully sent an innocent man to prison, but he'd also lost his best friend, and all while still having to defend a cold-blooded killer. The guilt was almost unbearable. If Mick didn't find a way to end this nightmare, the next ones to get hurt might be Sobel and his daughter. But to stop it all, he'd have to tread carefully. One wrong move, and it could be his undoing. That night, Mick got drunk to numb the pain. It was Sobel who picked him up and brought him home. "You know what scares me the most?" Sobel said quietly. "They're pure evil." Sobel didn't know the full truth. She only saw Mick blaming himself for Frank's death. The next day was trial day. Shaking off the haze of last night, Mick walked into court cool and collected. The first first witness called was the victim, Maggie. Mick didn't hold back. He exposed Maggie's life as a prostitute and played the bar's surveillance footage. It directly contradicted her claim that Lewis had broken into her home. Then Nick pressed her. Why did she approach Lewis? Cornered, Maggie admitted it was about the money, but denied it was blackmail. Next up was Lewis's mother. She testified that years ago she had been attacked, and since then Lewis always carried that knife for protection, not to hurt anyone. Her words clearly swayed the jury toward Lewis. Lewis, watching Mick smirk, he knew Mick wasn't thrilled about it, but had no choice but to keep defending him. When Lewis took the stand himself, he put on a full-on show, a wide-eyed innocent victim, tears streaming down his face. Do you know what it's like to be wrongfully accused? Sitting there while people spin lies, calling you disgusting and vile, tearing into your personal life, humiliating you. Mick saw right through it. Lewis was totally lost in the performance he'd written and directed himself. Seeing the tide turning, prosecutor Ted knew he couldn't count on an easy win, so he asked the judge for a trial extension. He had one last ace up his sleeve: Jesus. Jesus' sudden appearance completely threw Lewis off balance. The guy exploded with rage right there in court, but Mick stayed calm and cool, simply saying, "Leave this to me." What Lewis didn't know was that 3 special guests were already seated in the courtroom gallery. 2 cops from the old Val case, and Mick's ex-wife Sobel, all personally invited by Mick. Mick immediately objected, arguing the prosecution hadn't properly notified the defense about this new witness. Ted claimed Jesus had just been released from rehab yesterday, and there wasn't time to inform the defense, but everything was technically by the book. The judge reluctantly allowed Jesus to testify. Ted asked Jesus if Lewis ever told him why he was in prison. Jesus sneered. "He said it was for giving a bitch exactly what she deserved." The message was clear. The prosecution's job was done. Now it was Mick's turn. Mick started by getting Jesus to admit he was a habitual snitch, someone who'd repeatedly sold out his cellmates. Jesus confessed without hesitation. Then came the bombshell. Jesus revealed Lewis had bragged that this wasn't his first time behind bars. That hit even Mick like a ton of bricks. Later, Mick quietly confronted Lewis. "What's the truth? What else have you been hiding from me?" Lewis shot back. "This whole thing is a setup. You're framing me," Mick asked calmly. "Why would I do that?" Ted jumped in. "Did he say he killed another girl? Do you remember the details? She was a nightclub dancer with a sexy snake tattoo wrapped all around her body." That was it for the cops from the Val case. They couldn't sit still anymore. Mick had warned them he had a big gift for them today, but nobody expected this. This description matched the victim in Val's case perfectly. They immediately left to take action. Just as Ted finished questioning, Mick's assistant walked into the courtroom with perfect timing, handing the judge a newspaper. The headline? "A convicted rapist who was sent to prison based on Jesus' false testimony was exonerated and released in 1997. Police have since found the real killer." The judge was furious. The prosecution had put forward a key witness with a history of perjury and running lies. He stripped the jury of their right to decide and warned, if the prosecution didn't voluntarily drop the case, he'd rule against them immediately. That meant Mick won. He just won the case for Lewis. Wait, does that mean Mick let Lewis off the hook? Absolutely not. As soon as Lewis stepped out of the courthouse, police stopped him and arrested him on suspicion of murdering the dancer in Val's case. "Well, that's it, Lewis. I got you off this one. Time to find yourself a new lawyer." This was all part of Mick's carefully laid trap. He got the Jesus lead from Sobel, had his assistant dig into Jesus' rehab history, and reached out to a young woman Mick once helped. She got close to Jesus and subtly guided him toward perjury. Then, knowing Ted's ambition and eagerness to climb the ladder, Mick baited him into using Jesus in court, effectively sending this ticking time bomb right onto the witness stand. In the end, Mick didn't just win the case and save his law license. He earned his fee, gained respect from the cops, and most importantly, brought justice for Val and Frank. But Mick knew Lewis wouldn't just let this drop. Sure enough, thanks to family interference, the police couldn't find enough evidence, and Lewis was bailed out. The moment Mick heard this, he told Sobel to take their daughter back to her parents' place for safety, then rushed over to Sobel's house himself. As expected, Lewis showed up soon after. But here's where things got wild. Like a praying mantis stalking a cicada, but the real hunters lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a biker gang member appeared, wielding a heavy club, and started smashing up Lewis's car. Lewis yelled, furious, "Hey, that's my car! What the hell are you doing?" Then, a group of burly tough guys closed in on Lewis and started beating him down hard. Turns out, these were guys Mick had once helped, and they weren't about to let Lewis off easy. Mick called Sobel to let her know he was safe, then headed home. But when he got there, surprise! Lewis's mother, Mary, was waiting with a gun. She suddenly fired, screaming that she was the one who killed Frank. Luckily, the bullet missed the vital parts, and Mick fired back and in self-defense, avenging Frank's death before calling the cops. Later, Mick uncovered the last piece of the puzzle, a parking ticket proving that Lewis had been at the crime scene years ago on the day of the murder. With that, Lewis was sentenced to death, and Val was finally exonerated. In the end, Mick was back in his Lincoln, ready to take the next case. On his way home, the biker gang found him again. They had a brother in custody, the FBI breathing down their necks, and they wanted Mick's help. But when they asked about his fees, they flinched. This time, could he cut them a break? Mick just smiled. "This one's on the house." His driver nearly choked hearing that. Thought Mick's brain got fried from that gunshot. Mick gave a knowing smile. "A gentleman loves money, but he takes it the right way." He wasn't obsessed with chasing truth anymore. But one thing Mick knew for sure, a lawyer's bottom line? It's conscience. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts down in the comments. We'll bring you more good movie recaps. See you next time.